I remembered the exact moment my mother's smile broke. It was the kind of smile she had practiced for years, polite, patient, and just humble enough to make people believe she deserved everything that was coming. Because that morning, she was certain she was about to become rich. We all were sitting in that quiet lawyer's office, the kind with heavy wooden furniture and walls lined with books no one ever reads. My father sat beside her, tapping his fingers on the table like a man already counting money that wasn't his yet. And me, Emily Lawson, 21 years old, I sat across from them, watching, not smiling, not speaking, because unlike them, I knew something they didn't. But I didn't know everything. Not yet. The lawyer, a calm, older man named Mr. Hargrove, adjusted his glasses and opened a thick folder. "My condolences," he said gently. "Your father was a very precise man." My mother gave a soft, rehearsed sigh. "Oh, he was," she said. "Very particular. She hadn't visited him in 8 years. My father hadn't called him in 5. But today, none of that seemed to matter. Because in their minds, time erased everything. Or maybe money did." Mr. Hargrove cleared his throat and began reading. The room felt smaller with every word. My grandfather had written everything himself, every instruction, every detail. That didn't surprise me. He'd always been the kind of man who believed that if something mattered, you handled it personally. Then came the moment. The line, the one sentence that changed the air in that room so fast it felt like the oxygen had been pulled out. "I leave the entirety of my estate." My mother leaned forward. My father stopped tapping. "To be distributed according to the conditions outlined in the attached personal letter." Silence. Not confusion. Not yet. Just silence. My mother blinked. "I'm sorry," she said, forcing a small laugh. "What does that mean exactly?" The lawyer didn't smile. "It means," he said carefully, "that your father left specific instructions that must be followed before any inheritance is granted." My father's jaw tightened. "Well, then read the instructions," he snapped. And that's when things started to shift. The lawyer paused. Not a long pause, but long enough for me to notice the way his eyes moved. Not toward my parents, but toward me, just for a second, then back to the page. "There are conditions," he continued, "regarding family conduct, involvement, and—" "Conduct?" My mother interrupted, her voice sharpening. "What is that supposed to mean?" Mr. Hargrove didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned a page. Slowly, deliberately, "As per your father's written directive," he said, "these conditions were to be evaluated based on documented history over the past 20 years. That was the moment my father stood up. "Now wait just a minute," he said, his voice rising. "What kind of nonsense is this?" And for the first time since the reading began, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not sadness, not anger, but something colder, something final. I stared at the envelope in front of me, knowing that whatever was inside it was about to destroy everything. My parents thought they knew. My hands didn't feel steady when I picked up the envelope. It was heavier than it should have been, like it carried more than just paper inside. Across from me, my mother let out a tight laugh. "Oh, this is ridiculous," she said. "Just open it. Let's get this over with." But her voice had changed. The confidence was cracking. My father didn't sit back down. He stood there, arms crossed, jaw tight, watching me like I was suddenly the problem. "Yeah," he said sharply. "Go ahead. Let's see what kind of game he was playing." Game? That word stuck with me, because my grandfather never played games. Not with money, not with family, and definitely not with the truth. I ran my finger under the seal and slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a single folded letter. No legal language. No formal structure, just his handwriting. I recognized it instantly. Strong, clean, certain. The room went quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears. Even the clock on the wall seemed to stop. "Read it," my father said impatiently. But Mr. Hargrove spoke first. Out loud, he added, I hesitated, just for a second, because something in my chest told me once I started reading there would be no going back. Then I unfolded the paper and began. If you are hearing this letter, I read, my voice quieter than I expected, then it means your parents have reacted exactly as I knew they would. My mother scoffed. Oh, please. Let them finish, the lawyer said firmly. For the first time, she didn't argue. I swallowed and kept going. For 20 years, I watched from a distance. Not because I wanted to, but because I was shown very clearly where I stood in their lives. The words hit differently when spoken out loud. He wasn't guessing. He wasn't assuming. He had been watching, documenting, remembering. I kept every letter I sent that was never answered. Every birthday I spent alone. Every holiday where I was told they were too busy. While I saw the pictures of their vacations, my mother's face tightened. That's not, she started, but she stopped because she knew. She remembered. I am not writing this out of anger, I continued, my throat starting to feel dry. I am writing this because truth deserves to be spoken at least once. Without interruption. The room felt smaller now, heavier, like the walls themselves were listening. To my daughter, Emily, I read slowly, my eyes flicking toward myself. You taught me something important. You taught me what it feels like to be valued only when I have something to give. Silence. Deep, crushing silence. My mother shook her head. No, she whispered. That's not fair. But her voice was weaker now. Almost pleading. I waited. The letter continued. Not for apologies, but for effort. For presence. For even one moment where I wasn't an obligation. I could feel my hands tightening around the paper because I remembered those years too. I remembered the excuses, the missed visits, the way his name only came up when money did. And so I read, my voice steady now. I made a decision. That was the line, the one that changed everything again. My father leaned forward. What decision? He demanded. Keep reading, the lawyer said quietly. I decided that my legacy would not reward absence. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. No. And I decided, I continued, each word landing heavier than the last, that everything I leave behind will go to the one person who showed up. The air vanished from the room. My father slammed his hand on the table. That's enough, he shouted. This is manipulation. But I hadn't finished. Not even close. Because at the bottom of the page, there was one final paragraph. Short, sharp, and devastating. I stared at it for a second too long. My heart started pounding because suddenly I understood why this letter had been sealed, why it had my name on it, and why my grandfather had been so certain about this moment. There is something you don't know, something I have kept hidden for years, and now it's time the truth is finally told. The room didn't breathe. Not me, not my parents, not even the lawyer. It was like the world itself was waiting for the words I hadn't read yet. My fingers tightened around the paper. For a moment, I considered stopping, because something deep inside me was already warning. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about to change everything. Read it, my father said again, but his voice wasn't strong now. It was strained, almost desperate. I looked down at the final paragraph and began. For the one reading this, my voice softened without meaning to. There is something I never told you. Not because I didn't trust you, but because I was waiting for the right moment. A sharp intake of breath came from my mother. No, she whispered. I kept reading. I watched your life closely, I continued. I saw the way you were treated, the way your kindness was used, and the way your voice was often ignored. A memory hit me, then another, and another. Moments I had pushed aside for years suddenly didn't feel small anymore. You reminded me of someone, the letter said, someone I lost a long time ago. My mother shifted in her seat. What is this? She whispered, but no one answered her, because now even she felt it. Something wasn't right. I had a child once, the letter said. The words landed softly, But the impact was anything but. A child? My father snapped. What is she talking about? The lawyer didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even blink. I had a child, I repeated, my voice shaking now. Who was taken from me? Not by fate, but by silence, decisions, and selfishness. My heart started racing because suddenly, this didn't feel like a story. This felt like an accusation. I will not write every detail, I continued, because the people responsible already know what they did. The air turned cold. I looked up. My mother's face had gone pale. My father? He wasn't angry anymore. He looked cornered. What does that mean? He asked quietly this time. My voice shook slightly, but I continued. You were that child. Silence. Not shock, not chaos, just silence. My breath caught. No, I whispered to myself. You were taken from me, I read, my voice barely holding together, and raised by the very people who convinced themselves it was justified. The words hit harder than any slap could. I looked up, slowly, at my parents. My mother was shaking her head over and over. My father still hadn't looked at me. That's not true, she said quickly. He's lying, he was old. Keep reading, the lawyer repeated, firmer this time. My hands tightened around the paper. I didn't want to read the next line, but I did, because something inside me needed to know. To that moment, I read slowly. I learned something, that sometimes the greatest betrayal doesn't come from enemies. I paused. Even before I read it, I knew how it would end. It comes from family. Silence. Heavy, crushing silence. My mother suddenly stood up. This is enough, she said sharply. This is nonsense. We're not listening to this. Sit down, my father said. And that's when everything changed, because his voice was shaking. She looked at him, confused, afraid. Slowly, she sat back down. I looked down at the letter. There were only a few lines left, but somehow they felt heavier than everything before them. Because of that moment, I read slowly. I made a choice, not just about my past. My heart pounded louder, but about the future. And now, I swallowed hard, because this line would break whatever was left in that room. The truth about who you are and what was done. I froze. This wasn't just about my parents anymore. This was about me. My hands went cold. Not nervous, not scared, just empty. The letter trembled slightly between my fingers. Across the table, my mother was staring at me like she could stop the words before they came out. My father? He wasn't even looking at me anymore. He was staring at the floor, and that's when I understood. He already knew. Read it, the lawyer said quietly. No pressure, no emotion, just certainty. I looked down at the final line, and everything inside me slowed. For the one reading this, my voice cracked, but I didn't stop. You deserve the truth that was kept from you your entire life. A sharp inhale came from my mother. No, she whispered. I kept reading. You are not who they told you that you are. The words didn't make sense at first. Not fully. They just floated there. Heavy, confusing. What is that supposed to mean? My mother snapped, panic rising. No one answered her. Because now, even I was afraid to understand. The child I lost was never truly gone. The room spun, just slightly, but enough. They were taken from me and raised under a different truth. My heart started pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. No, this wasn't. I shook my head instinctively. This doesn't make sense, I muttered, but my voice sounded distant, like it didn't belong to me anymore. It does, the lawyer said quietly, and when I looked up at him, there was something in his eyes. Not sympathy, not surprise, just confirmation. No, my mother said louder now. No, that's not true. He's twisting things. Let them finish, the lawyer repeated. My hands tightened around the paper. I didn't want to read the next line, but I did, because something inside me needed to know. You were that child. Silence. Not shock. Not chaos. Just silence. My breath caught. No. I whispered. You were taken from me, I read, my voice barely holding together, and raised by the very people who convinced themselves it was justified. The words hit like a hammer. I looked up, slowly. At my parents. My mother was shaking her head. My father still hadn't looked at me. That's not true, she said quickly. But I knew it was true. This was my life. And now, I finally knew the truth. The letter ended with one line. There is one final decision I have made. No one spoke. Not my mother. Not my father. Not even the lawyer. Because we all knew. Whatever came next would not just end this meeting. It would end everything we used to call a family. My eyes stayed locked on the final lines of the letter. The last words my grandfather ever wrote. My chest felt tight. But not from fear anymore. From clarity. Read it, the lawyer said softly. And this time, I didn't hesitate. With this truth revealed, I began, my voice steady now. There's one final decision I have made. My mother let out a quiet sob. My father didn't move. I have spent years thinking about what legacy truly means, I continued, and I have come to understand it is not about money. Legacy, I read, is about who stands beside you when you have nothing to give. A long silence followed, because everyone in that room knew exactly what that meant. And so, I continued, I leave everything I own, not to those who expected it. My father slowly closed his eyes, but to the one who showed me what loyalty still looks like. No name needed. No explanation required. My mother gasped. No, this isn't right. But I kept reading because it wasn't over. Not as a reward, I said, but as recognition. You gave me your time? When others gave me excuses, I felt something rise in my chest. Not anger, not sadness. Something quieter, stronger. You listened. When others dismissed, my mother covered her face. My father didn't move. And most importantly, I read slowly. You never saw me as something to gain from. I paused. You saw me as someone to care for. Silence. But this time, it felt different. Because now, the truth wasn't hidden anymore. It was standing in the middle of the room, and no one could look away. I looked back down at the letter. There was one final note written at the bottom. Smaller, almost like it had been added later. With this truth revealed, do not carry anger forward, but do not carry a loot either. I folded the letter carefully, placed it back on the table, and stood up. My mother reached for me again, but this time I stepped back, not out of anger, not out of revenge, but out of understanding. You made your choices, I said calmly. And now I'll make mine. No shouting. No scene, no chaos, because the real damage had already been done. Not by me, not by my grandfather. I turned toward the door,